Good evening and welcome to the Los Alamos Historical Society's lecture. My name is Todd Urbach and I'm a board member of the Society and the program chair. Tonight's lecture is not a lecture. It's the New Mexico Arts Panel, which you're going to enjoy. And it fits perfectly into the Made in New Mexico theme of the lecture series this year. These lectures are sponsored by the Los Alamos Historical Society members and by the Los Alamos National Bank. So if you've sold one of your pieces of art, or if you need to buy a piece of art, go see your friends at the LANB. Now, these fabulous artists, they brought a few of their pieces for sale. We have weavings out there and a few pieces that they have. So look for that after the panel. Did anybody read the Wall Street Journal? Raise your hand. Did you see the op-ed this morning? I thought this was very appropriate. The title is, What to Do If Your Child's First Love Is... art. And it's by a guy named Cherry Cianciolo, chief editor at Emerson and Church Publishers in Medfield, Massachusetts. I'm just going to read the last paragraph of this op-ed. No one will deny there are beleaguered artists who regret the path they took. In fact, rue the day they first pressed middle C, stood before an easel, or danced in Ponte. But for every one of them, how many mathematicians, engineers, and scientists are there still gnawed many years later by the fact that they relinquished their first love for the sake of a big house, 3 cars, and a flat-screen TV? I'm not qualified to introduce the panelists tonight. They're accomplished artists. And so for that, I'm going to introduce John Rumner, board member and Historic Structures chair.
It seems that very often a person is characterized by the work they do. Tom Sanford, he's an engineer. And Danny Erickson is a physicist. Charlie Carrillo is a santero, a master santero. This has been his life's work. A santero is one who carves and paints the images of saints. And for the past 40 years, Charlie has studied and reconstructed many of the techniques and like the pigments and whatnot of the master santeros of centuries past. He's also an expert on the lives of the saints and kind of like the spiritual basis of the foundation that guided and motivated other santeros. Today, Charlie's widely recognized as the primary authority on the subject of santeros. And he's also considered by many to be the most accomplished artist practicing this regional tradition. But Charlie is much more than an artist. He is a scholar. He earned a doctorate in anthropology and archaeology from the University of New Mexico. He teaches courses there. He's authored several books, and he serves as a mentor for many, many artists. And testimony to his skills are the many awards that he's received. Some of his honors include the Hispanic Heritage Award from the Museum of International Folk Art, the Lifetime Achievement Award at the annual Traditional Spanish Market, where he's won many first places, best of shows, and grand prize entries. In 2006, he received the prestigious National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, which is our nation's highest form of recognition of folk art and traditional arts. And so we thank Charlie tonight, who has offered to be the moderator of the panel. I have a brief introduction to the other panel members, and I think Charlie and others can add to it. We're going to start with Andrew Ortega in the middle. He's in the official uniform tonight, a weaver. He's here with his wife, Evita. And Andrew is a seventh generation weaver from the Ortega family in Chimayo, New Mexico. They began with his great-great-great-grandfather back in the early 1700s when the community was just first established, I imagine. And his grandfather's name Gabriel Ortega, and he was one of the first settlers of that area. And some of Andrew's weavings are in permanent collections of the Smithsonian in Washington, in the Albuquerque International Sunport, the Albuquerque Museum, the Museum of International Folk Art, and he's in the Southwest Arts and Crafts Show. He currently specializes in large Chimayo rugs, 54 by 84 inches. They're woven of the same kind of traditional, using the same traditional looms that his ancestors would have recognized and still been able to weave. And Andrew, I imagine, just by looking at these rugs, you can tell us which one of your ancestors. And we'll hear about that later in the evening. Next, I'd like to introduce Fred Ray Lopez Tinsmith. He's here with his wife Lucy and his son Fred. Fred has his own tinwork studio on Don Gaspar Street in Santa Fe. And he's had that for, we figured 15 or 20 years. 20 years. Yeah. And Fred's tinwork is used as the logo for the Department of Tourism for New Mexico. It's got this beautiful New Mexico sign and decoration. So it's a very, very popular piece of art in the history of New Mexico. His tinwork is in a permanent collection of the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe and many, many private collections around the world, including in our museum. His art is featured now in the Changing exhibit that most of you went to earlier this evening. And if you haven't been there, you should go see it soon. It'll be there during the months of March and April. I first met Fred, it was like 2 summers ago, and he was conducting a workshop for children, our summer workshop on tinsmithing, and I heard this tremendous racket, and it sounded like hail on a tin roof, and I walked in here, and there were about 25 little kids. They were maybe 6 to 10 years old. Every one of them had a hammer and a block of wood and a piece of tin, and they were just intensely pounding away, not talking to each other, and they were just really going. It must have made you feel very good, all these respective new artists. My granddaughter was one of them, and it was special. Debbie Carrillo, wife of Charlie, is a potter. She works with micaceous clay, you see in the table here. She began showing in the Spanish market after Charlie secretly entered, without her knowledge, into this juried market, and she was accepted. And since then, she's been a part of the market and teaches her craft throughout New Mexico. In 2014, which is last year, she was awarded the Spanish Market's Master Award for Lifetime Achievement, same award Charlie has received. Now, this award honors more than just the artist's work. It recognizes a commitment to keeping the artistic tradition alive in the community. And Debbie's certainly doing that, and she is really a pioneer in reviving the art of pottery within the Spanish community. Some of you might have expected to see Gloria Lopez Cordova here this evening, and she has been planning for many, many months to come. A couple of weeks ago, she fell and broke a couple ribs, broke her collarbone, and she almost got pneumonia, and she's really still kind of really hurting. And so she unfortunately had to cancel this evening. But, Charlie, thank you for coming here this evening, and thank you all the panel members for all of us who live in northern New Mexico, making this a richer experience for us. So, how many microphones do we have?
One.
This is it. You're the man. We have until midnight, right?
Tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you for all coming out tonight, and I thank my panelists, my wife Debbie, Andrew, and of course Fred. What I thought we would do tonight, and I'll pass this microphone, I want to first have each of the artists, and I will be the last, to give you a little bit about why they continue in their tradition, why they believe it's important that there's a continuity from the colonial period, the 17th, 18th, and 19th century up to the present, why they believe what they're doing counts. And I think this is the perfect panel to do it with, because if you look at the traditions, probably the single oldest tradition in New Mexico that you can really document in a very clear way are weavers. The first artisans come up even with Oñate, some weavers came up early on. And so we'll start with Andrew, and then I'll have Fred talk about the tin that comes in during the Mexican Republic period, and Debbie talk about the micaceous pottery, and I'll wrap it up. And if you can just make some comments, each of you, and we can pass the microphone around, and we'll go on to some other subjects. So if you don't mind starting, Andrew.
Put you on the spot.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here tonight. My family, the Ortega family in Chimay, has been here a long time. And just over there down in the valley. And as I sit here, I see some of our curtains. I know that our shop wove these curtains. And I think my father wove that blue rug there. And another one, I don't know. We have this connection to things. And it started a long time ago. You know, the weaving has been around for as long as civilization has been around. So, you know, people learned to plant, and then they had to learn to make clothes. So weaving has been here since humans have been able to make clothes. And so, like Charles said, when the conquistadors, the explorers came up, they had weavers. They had the ability to weave, and most of the, I think a lot of the people had a knowledge of weaving, and they brought their sheep with them, and they had a knowledge of making dyes and things like that. Now, in Chimay, I think our family starts after the reconquest of Santa Fe, when we started coming back into the north. There may have been people in Chimay before the reconquest, you know, but I don't think the Ortegas, they might have been there, they might not. The history's kind of murky. But our first ancestor we know of, Gabriel Ortega, was a weaver, and he may have been sent up there to teach weaving to the community. It's hard to know that for sure. But he taught his sons to weave, and all my ancestors that wove are the men. So Ortega is intact. Some of the other families have had daughters, and they learned to weave, but they changed their names, so it's hard to trace them. So it's a long connection. You know, the family tree's roots are really deep, and towards I always theorize that the reason the weaving survived is because it's so isolated here, the Industrial Revolution skipped northern New Mexico. There was no, mechanization of weaving like in Scotland and Europe, and then in the eastern United States, they didn't learn about the steam engine and all those little things, because really the first things that were computerized were looms. The Jacquard loom had punch cards on it, and that's how they determined their designing. Well, that skipped here. Every design is in here. So you have to use your rule, as they say. and so, because it skipped here, when the railroads finally came to Espanola in around 1890, around that time, there was an interest in the artwork of northern New Mexico. And the similarity between our weavings and Navajo weavings, they're very similar because you put in your pattern the same way. Even though the looms, the Navajo loom is this way and our loom is this way when you put in the design, it's still the same way. You're still putting the design in the same way, and you're still counting threads and things like that. So there was but our looms are much quicker because we use pedals and the beater board and all that. And the Indians have to put everything in like this, so it takes them a long time. So in our case, we could make stripes quicker, and then we could put a big design in stripes. So we could make a blanket in half the time, or a quarter of the time as a Navajo blanket. So it kept the price low. So people who wanted an Indian Navajo blanket, but couldn't afford it, could afford one of our blankets. So that gave us a market. And so in 1900, my grandfather started Ortega. His name was Nicasio, so he started Nicasio Ortega. That was the name of his business. And he had a brother right next door to him named Reyes Ortega, and he had his own business. And he had a brother-in-law named Lorenzo Trujillo, and he had his own business. So they all were selling blankets to tourists or to guys who came in from the east and said, hey, can you make me some blankets? And then they sell them blankets, and then they ship them off somewhere. And my grandpa, the story goes, my father told me that my grandpa, at one time, some guy came in to town and said, I want a bunch of blankets. And he said, could you make me 40 of these big blankets, like that size up there? But I need them in 2 months. That's a lot of work, So, my grandpa figures, yeah, I can do it. So he got some other guys he knew who wove in the village, and he paid them so much. He bought the wool and set them up, and he paid him, and he paid the guy off, and got his money, and that's really the start of his business. He said he could do that. And so we still do that nowadays. We have, I think there's like 20 weavers that we employ that they weave pretty much full time. They like to, they're professional weavers. They know what they're doing. In the old days, and in the 20s and 30s in Chimayo, there were a lot of weavers in town. And they were contractors in Santa Fe, the Anglo contractors. It was Ganscraft and Crossan, and there was another, I can't, and there was this guy Candelario, who were the original trading post in Santa Fe. That was this guy's. And they would do trading. I mean, they would pay weavers in Chimayo by the piece. You bring in, weave me this, and I'll pay you this much. So these people had this way to make a living. And so it took a lot of the Chimayos out of the mines, because in those days there wasn't a lot of work. And so a lot of people would go off and they go mining in Silverton, Colorado, or Leadville, Colorado, or Torero, New Mexico, near Pecos. So if you had that skill to weave, you didn't have to leave home. You could weave, and then in the summer you could farm, in the winter you can weave when it's cold. So it was a nice thing. And then after World War II, and during World War II, everybody split. They went to go work on the rail. You got drafted or joined the army or the service, or they went to the shipyards. in California and worked on ships, you know, we get some income. And then after the war, some people stayed there and some people came back. And there was still a demand for the weaving, and my father came out of the war, and he brought his wife from Georgia, my mother, and she was in the Army too. We met, and she had gone to Auburn University in Alabama, and so she had a college degree, and then my other uncle, Jose Ramon, who was an excellent weaver, and his wife were in the business. They joined my grandfather in the business, and they changed the business into a nice showroom, and they put in, they went on, before I was born, my parents would take a panel truck full of blankets, and they'd drive down Route 66, and they'd stop at all of the trading posts and sell blankets, you know. And so they got their name out. And then, but some of the other guys, they weren't the only ones. There were other weavers and other businesses around. And like some of the ones in Santa Fe, they would advertise, you know, Chimayo Indian weaving, and like that. But we never advertised ourselves as Indians. But some of the other guys, especially the ones out of Santa Fe that weren't Hispanic, would advertise it as Chimayo Indian. And sometimes you'll see that on eBay. You look on eBay for an old Chimayo blanket, and it says, woven by Chimayo Indians. And I was telling Charlie a while ago, it's too bad we couldn't do that so we could get a casino up there. And anyway, so the business, as people started driving, you know, the roads got better and the interstate highways, people from other parts of the country would come in. So eventually we were able to stop wholesaling our blankets. We couldn't keep enough blankets in stock to wholesale them, so we just sell retail. We still do just sell retail now. So we've made a good living off it. It's a pretty amazing thing. So sometimes you can love art and make a living and have a flat screen TV and 3 cars and a nice house. I think that's it.
Fred, if you can hear me, I would, Fred, if you can talk, you know, about the same kind of thing that Andy, you know, in your tradition, you know, so few people understand when Tim came to New Mexico and what our ancestors were doing with him.
Yeah, tin work came to New Mexico mostly when the Army came through on the Santa Fe Trail. They brought tin containers like food or drink, and the locals would get those and unravel those and just make candle holders for their homes and decorative items, religious items, nichos to hold wooden retablos and santos and so forth. So they kind of worked with each other, the tinsmith and the santeros. One guy would make the nicho and another guy would make the santero and put them in there. And so they used to call tin work poor man's silver because they couldn't afford the silver from Europe and so forth. And so they just, like I said, unraveled those tin cans and they called it poor man's silver. So going back to what he was saying, these things are, that this gentleman went to his grandpa and told him, hey, can you make me 40 of these? But not realizing, it's easy to say it, but it's another thing to do it. These things are handmade, and every one of them is just, you know, a lot goes into making these items. People don't realize it unless they watch you do it, and they still don't realize it unless they try to do it themselves. So I opened up a studio there in Santa Fe in 1991, and tourists are always going through there, and I'm able to give them demonstrations of tin work and give them the history of tin work. And so, and I have a little sign that says "Made in America." Because people, we got so many things imported now, you hardly see too many things made in America anymore. So I use that sign that was Mr. Walton used for Walmart, Made in America. He started off doing that. So I have that there, and then it opens it up for people to ask questions, and I'm able to share tin work with people. I go into the elementary schools and I still teach children. John was mentioning that we came here and we taught kids to get the feel of tin, and it takes coordination, eye coordination and hand coordination. And so I love to teach tin work. I have a few students that I've taught, and they've gone on to do really good with tin work. I've done a lot of reproductions for like Bandolier and a bunch of museums around New Mexico. I did a bunch of lighting for the National Hispanic Cultural Center. So it's fun. Tin work is always fun. I always try to be innovative. I try to keep the tradition, always going back and to the way they used to do it. But I also want to do, if something comes to me, I want to be innovative myself, and I want to inspire younger people just to do what they want to do. Use the old tin work as your guide, but open up and use your imagination and just get creative.
I'm gonna ask Debbie, that I kind of forced into her tradition to.
Well, I was just gonna say, do you want me to tell him my truth or your truth?
It's yours.
The truth is that when I was growing up, I never even imagined playing with mud. I was the princess at home. This is how bad it was. I grew up with my grandmother and my grandfather, and so when my grandmother would get ready to go to bingo, she'd say, "Oh, hijita, ahí está la masa. Desde las tortillas," okay? She made the dough for me. It was already made. All I had to do was roll it out and put it on the stove and cook it. She'd walk out the door, my grandpa would say, "Hijita, yo los hago." So he would do it. And I didn't do anything. I was very, very spoiled. So when I married Charlie, he opened up a whole new world to me. He came from Albuquerque, I grew up in Navajo, and the differences between the two of us was incredible. But the thing that we had in common was that we both believed in family and our values were the same. Okay? So when he introduced me to pottery, and I say he introduced me, is because one day he was at Ghost Ranch Conference Center and he was with Master Potter Felipe Ortega, who incidentally revived, if you will, the pottery tradition as far as using micaceous clay. Okay? He reintroduced that not only to the Hispanic population, but also to the pueblos surrounding him, the Jicarillas, the Santa Clara, San Juan, San Ildefonso. He reintroduced that particular clay, micaceous clay, back into existence again. Okay, and he learned, Felipe Ortega learned micaceous clay from his aunt, who at the time was blind. So she taught him by feel. He would work on his clay piece, and then she'd say, "No, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do." And so he's been doing it now for well over 40 years, and I learned from him. Charlie and he were teaching at Ghost Ranch Conference Center, and it was in November, I remember one year. The kids we had two children, Estate and Rowan, and they were actually very young. I think Rowan was like 2 and Estate was maybe 5 or so. And Charlie came home and said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to take a pottery class with Felipe." And I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, when does this happen?" He says, Oh, weekend after next. I said, Charlie, we've got 2 children. Who's gonna take care of them? And he said, well, I can take care of them. I said, fine, no problem, I'm gone. So I was gone for 3 days. And really, in all honesty, it only took me 3 days with Felipe to actually get a feel for the clay. But it took me another 7 years before I actually felt comfortable with the clay. I tried for many, many years. I would fire pottery, and in the firing, I'd lose maybe 3/4 of my inventory. And so needless to say that when that would happen, and Charlie's here to attest to it, I wouldn't do clay for another 2 to 3 months. It's just like, I'm not doing this, I can't do this anymore, I'm just not doing it. You know, and eventually I'd get back to it, and it was just getting started, and continue. But it was really interesting. I like working with the clay because it's got a feeling to it of elasticity. It's got this wonderful feel to it. This particular clay, you don't have to do anything to it except add water to it. You dig it up, you take all the debris out of it, and all you do is add water to it, and it works for you. It just works beautifully. And this particular type of clay has what they call it, it's got mica, it's decomposed mica already in the clay. So basically what happens is the mica, when you dig it up and when you're building your pottery, it kind of lays in a shelf form. And so when you vitrify it, when you're firing your pottery, it turns into a molten glass, so it coats the whole body of the clay. And so that's why you can cook in this. You can cook in this on a gas stove, electric stove, in the oven, in the microwave, with absolutely no problems at all. I have many people who say, but it's got sparkles in it, it's got metal in it. No. Mica is a mineral, it is not a metal. So it's not toxic to the body at all. In fact, there was a study done at Michigan State University that actually showed that it helped some people who actually had parasites in their body rid the parasites of their body. I don't know how, but the study is there. Anyways, but you know, it's a tradition that I'd like to carry on, and I think it's going to happen just simply because I have taught children all over the state of New Mexico, mostly in the southern part of New Mexico, in Clovis. I've done many classes there with children there, and my biggest challenge was in Las Lunas. I did a week stint in Las Lunas where I had classes from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, every hour on the hour for 5 days. We worked with about 140, I think it was like 148 children that week. You know, I worked with each class every single day, and that was, I think, the hardest thing I've ever had to do because I didn't have any help. Usually Charlie goes along with me, and when I'm doing these classes, and he can help me out a little bit, but in this particular case, I was all on my own. And the art teacher tried to help, but he's a santero, he does pueblos. So it was like, oh my God, but it worked, and I was really happy with the turnout, you know, that week. These are all fired with wood. I use pit firing, and what I do is, I'm gonna pass this to you. What I do when I fire, you'll notice that there's different colors on my pottery. In this particular case, if I tried to do this again, there's absolutely no way on God's green earth that I could do this again. But basically what's happening is I turn these upside down, and I have a bunch of potteries around it, and then I build my like a log cabin around this wood, and I stoke the fire underneath, and this takes on a life of its own. So basically what happens is that when the wood falls against the body of the clay, the pot, I should say, the body of the clay, the smoke gets embedded in the pores. And so that's how come you have the black here. In this particular case, what I did is I did a reduction. And the way that I did that is I had a metal can filled with sawdust, very clean sawdust. It's a good thing that I have friends that are carpenters and woodworkers because they give me all their sawdust and stuff. And so what I did is I have a container that I filled with sawdust. And when these potteries come off of out from the pit, they're very hot. So what I do is I just put them very gently into this can, and I cover them with sawdust. This one, it's very obvious, didn't get sawdust on the top of it. So this is the way that it came out. And it's a very interesting piece, and it's a piece that I take with me everywhere. A really good friend of mine who passed
bought this, and she gave it back to me in her will when she passed away, so I'm very, very fortunate that I have this piece. But, there's lots of steps to doing pottery, you know, there's 7 different steps. People think it's very easy, and, when I ask them to go ahead and try doing it, you know, I'll give you the basics and try doing it. It's just like Fred said, people don't know until they try it, they don't know exactly how hard it is, because as a master, as a producer of your own artwork, you have worked at it for so many years that it's easy, it comes easy to you after so much practice. But when somebody sees that you're doing this and they say, oh, I could do that, here's the clay. You know, and I'm not trying to be mean, but I just want them to see and appreciate what it is that they're looking at. Okay, and I think that's true for all of us. You know, it's one of these things that we take pride in what we do, and it's not that we're trying to be, I don't know what the word is. We're not trying to gloat over what we do. We just want them to learn the appreciation and what it means and why we do what we do.
Thank you, Debbie
I
and
didn't
Andrew
make history, I'm sorry.
and Fred. I'll do a little bit of that. Kind of the reason I got Debbie involved in the pottery was,
Because he couldn't.
I wanted to do pottery at one time in my life, but they say, you know, there's a saying in Spanish that says that you can't be in the procession or in the church about the same time. And I realized my procession was making santos. I couldn't be a potter and try and be a jack of all trades. So I thought it'd be nice if somebody in the family was a potter. And the reason for that, and I'll get to that real quickly, was in 1980, when I applied for the Spanish market for the first time, I applied with not only the santos I was making, but I also was interested in the pottery. And I wrote them a letter and saying, it is my understanding that my ancestors in Hispanic villages were making pottery. And I got a really nice, and I still have it, I've saved it because it's a very important part of my life, a letter dated May 24th, 1980, and it says, Dear Mr. Carrillo, it's written by a man by the name of Alan Vedder. Alan Vedder was the president and one of the big supporters of Spanish market, and he was in charge of Spanish market for many, many years. And Alan writes to me, and basically I'll paraphrase, he said, Dear Mr. Carrillo, it is unfortunate you believe that your ancestors were making pottery. All the experts I have worked with over the last 20 years have been to numerous archaeological sites of the Spanish colonial period, and there is nothing but native-made pottery at the sites. It is ludicrous to assume that your ancestors would dirty their hands in such a lowly craft. And he goes on and on and on and says, if there's any evidence you can present in support of this, please kindly bring those to the office so that the experts can examine them. Well, unfortunately, he died 2 years before I finished my damn dissertation. And I'm saying that in an honest way. And the dissertation was on Hispanic pottery in New Mexico. It took me 16 years to finish the dissertation. And because I was starting from scratch, I had to go do not only field work in asking people like my wife's grandmother about the pottery, because she cooked in this stuff when she was young. But I went to villages all over from southern Colorado all the way down to the Mesilla Valley in New Mexico, in southern New Mexico, and villages throughout New Mexico, and literally documented a very extant tradition that died sometime around World War II. But thousands of Hispanics were involved in the colonial period, thousands over the years in making pottery. If you count all the people that were making pottery, and at least what I know of, and in most cases these people were disenfranchised. They had no way to support the families, and the two things I came to realize very clearly was there were two traditions in New Mexico where people can totally make their living off of a craft, and they were the weavers and the potters. And in the potters' case, they were mostly disenfranchised people. They had lost their land, they had no way to support themselves, so they turned to necessity. Everybody needed pottery for storing food, for cooking, and so on. So that's how I got Debbie involved, you know, and she was the lucky recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award. In my case, a little bit of background, I was trained as an archaeologist, so I went to the village of Abiquiu in 1979.
Dug me up.
And I was interested in historic archaeology, and I'd been invited by a professor of mine to work with the community. I was a youngster, I was 21 years old, and I was asked to be the director of an archaeological program at the age of 21. And I know she had a lot of confidence in my work as an archaeologist. I had been to field school for many years, and I suppose I demonstrated my skills as a competent archaeologist. So the next thing I knew, I was in the village of Abiquiu, and a couple of years later, this was the result. You know, we were married, and that whole time I was interested in historic archaeology. I became interested in this whole process of documenting Hispanic pottery traditions. But at the same time, my own artistic abilities as a child kind of started rearing up, and I started making santos just to give away. Living in Abiquiu, making santos, because I was spending my time in the archives, looking at the documents, looking at church inventories, looking at the stuff that had been written about the santos, even in the colonial period. And I became fascinated with that. I said, well, I'll try my hand at that. And I gave probably the first 100, 150 pieces I ever made, I gave them away. But I soon realized that when I was in graduate school, there was money to be made. Not a lot of money, but people needed gifts for family members and presents and wives and children. And fellow graduate students realized I was doing this, and they would come to me and say, can we buy a santo from you? Can we do this? And not long after that, I entered Spanish Market that year in 1980, and entered Spanish Market the same year I started graduate school. Never dreaming that I would be writing books about the tradition, be sitting there doing a panel discussion about this. Never realized that. But what I realized early on in my own research about the santeros and the saint makers from the colonial period was one very important fact, and that fact was that everything that had been written by our historians from the time I first started making santos until only very recently, and when I put the pen in my hand, the notion was that the artisans that we call santeros, the saint makers, were itinerant, uneducated folk artists going from village to village, kind of peddling their wares. I wrote a book a number of years ago called The Tapestry of Kinship, A Web of Influence, which I was able to prove as a scholar this time, not as an artist, but as a scholar by using the documents, that indeed the santeros, the saint makers from the colonial period, were very well educated. In fact, many of them have titles in civil titles. For instance, one of the famous artisans, probably the most famous santero ever lived, was a man by the name of Rafael Aragon, Jose Rafael Aragon. He was born and raised in Santa Fe. He was the secretary of the Cabildo in Santa Fe. He had beautiful penmanship. He had left hundreds and hundreds of documents that he wrote during his lifetime. He was involved in everything in city affairs, but he was also a well-known artisan. And he lived in the part of Santa Fe that's closest to the church now, the cathedral basilica. And it was a barrio, it was a neighborhood of artisans all involved in woodworking. There were carpenters, there were sculptors, and there were painters in the inventories of this neighborhood. And when I started doing the research, I realized that these were guilds of artisans, and the Aragon family, along with a family by the name of Benavides, another family by the name of Garcia, were all the families that had complete control over this entire carving tradition and the making of saints in New Mexico. They actually ran a guild, an informal guild, very much like the guilds you see in colonial Mexico and in South America, in big and very large metropolitan centers. But these guys had, it was a guild, but it was not as a formal guild. that you typically saw in other large metropolitan centers. So hopefully, in my research, I was able to change the idea in the eyes of the historians, the art historians, and among my own people, that this wasn't an itinerant crowd. These were well-educated men who were serving their community with very purposeful work, commissioned to do private things and also things for the church. So that's where I've spent my time. I've done as much research, I think, as I've done actually painting and everything else. She almost had to drive over here. My eyes were blurry because I'm still old-fashioned. Even though I have a brand new computer, I still write on yellow tablets. Okay? Because I think that way. That's how my mind is wired. So I spent the whole morning writing. I'm putting together the history of Chimayo, the history of the Santuario in Chimayo. I have a book contract with the Museum of New Mexico Press to finish for the first time a really complete history of the Santuario de Nuestra Señora de Esquipulas in Chimayo. And people are thinking, what are you doing? You're an artist. What are you doing writing? But I have two legs. One is in the art world, the other one's in the research world. But I can't stand on one leg and I can't stand the other leg. To have balance in my life, I have to have both legs down, and one's in one world and one's in their world. But that's what I think we all do. The wonderful thing about the traditions is what you see represents a continuity of traditions. So the question I'm going to pose, and we can start with Andrew again, is we were just talking about this. There's hurdles that we go through, not just economic hurdles. Our businesses with this slump in the economy and everything else, we've all been clobbered by that. But there are things that other forces, other factors out there that kind of are hitting on all of us, and Andrew and I were just talking about one of them that involves wool and everything else. So I want each of the artisans to talk about not their fears, but the future, what the future, things that are kind of forcing us to not reevaluate what we do, certainly, because what we do is what we do as artisans. But what are the things that can or likely affect us as artisans and as businessmen and businesswomen?
And you know what I'm talking about, we need to talk about
Yeah. Well, I think the future's kind of murky in the handcraft type of work that we all do, because I think even though like Fred does classes for kids and where I am in Chimayo, we have a little museum and we have classes in Spanish colonial arts for kids, and we like to expose them to those things, but I'm not sure if kids are going to continue. They may learn the basics, but you have to have a love for it to keep it going. And I don't know if the economics of it will allow them to continue doing that. Like in our weaving business, even in my own family, I'm the 7th generation, and there is an 8th generation, but that 8th generation isn't involved very much in the weaving business. So it's like, well, maybe then, and there's a 9th generation, some of them are teenagers and stuff, and so you gotta kind of hope, well, maybe these guys or these girls will pick up the weaving to continue it. It's a huge legacy, and I know like the other weaving shops, Trujillo's and Centinela, they're in the same pickle. Their children aren't really that interested in the weaving either, and so will it continue? And like when I was talking with Charlie he asked me about the wool. Well, my grandfather we bought from this one woolen mill in New Richmond, Ohio, and most of the weavers around here and even in the Navajo lands buy from this woolen mill, Klaskins, and it's been around since 1890 or something, and it's in the same family. The Klaskins still run this family. But they're in their third generation, and those, it's run by the daughters now, but they're around my age, around 60. And I don't know if their kids are interested in keeping that around too, you know? So we have the modernization of things where kids are more interested in playing with their phones more than, or video games. You know, they're very distracted now. When I was when I was young, when I was 9 or 10, they tried to get me to weave and I refused. I didn't want to weave. And then when I became a teenager, I decided I'd be a busboy at Rancho de Chimano. And then when I was 17, I decided I'd be a weaver because that was much easier. Well, it wasn't easy, but I was always around weaving, so I knew the basics to weave. So after, I think I was a senior in high school, so I decided that's, weaving was better than being a waiter. And so that's when I kind of sort of got serious about weaving. And you gotta get weavers young. It's people take it up, you know, it takes a lot of, you gotta have a loom, you gotta learn to work the loom, you gotta have the material to weave with it. You know, some people learn to spin their yarn and dye it, and you know, dye their own yarn, and that's nice. It makes it expensive. So you're going to probably be doing that for your own enjoyment, you know. But it takes a lot of trial and error, you know. It kind of looks easy when someone does it well, but even just keeping a straight line is a challenge when you're first learning, you know. You see beginners, they look like the road down to Espanola, you know. And so you have to master that, and then you master your designs and all that. So it's a step-by-step process, you know. And I don't know, I hope that there are some good young weavers. I know some good young weavers. And the weaving will continue, but will it continue on a commercial scale? That's the question. You know, will there still be a business like Ortega's Weaving Shop? They can, you know, some guy comes in and says, I want 40 blankets this size, can you do it? And we can do it, but will there be someone left that can do it, you know? And I guess that's the big question.
One of the recent things that has happened in the tin work world is we lost one of our suppliers, and we used to get our tin out of Fallensby, West Virginia. And if you look at some of the old tin work, you'll see their stamp on there, and they used to make what they call roofing turn, and it was lead and tin combined. And about two to 3 years ago, maybe a little longer, they just up and went out of business. I didn't even know till they were out of business, because you don't order tin all the time. But by the time I got to them, they were sold out. They just said, we're shutting down, there's no more tin. And so that old tin is no longer available. And they were making it, like I said, in the 1800s. And so that really hurt the tin market. So everyone was scattering what to do, where they're going to get tin. Some guys used canning tin. And myself, I didn't really like the canning tin because it was too shiny for me. And I kind of like at least a matte finish when I work with tin. And so I looked all over for some suppliers. I finally found one. We don't know how good it's going to work out, but so getting the available material is kind of a struggle. And then to work with it, it's a little bit different than the old tin. It solders differently, you heat it differently. So that's kind of hurt us in the tin world. But we're getting it done. Many of the pieces that are on display there are made out of that new tin. So it works out fine. And so that's all I have for now.
And my particular particular case, I worry about, am I going to be able to get my cautious clay for very much longer? Felipe Ortega has basically a contract from BLM, or with a BLM, where he can actually take and extract the micaceous clay. And so for me and many other potters as well, it's easier to just buy the clay already processed from him, because he has the contract, first off. Secondly, he has already invented a way to extract all the debris from the clay so that it's pure. It's just the clay itself and the mica. And but he's getting on in age, and he doesn't have children. You know, all he has at this point is a bunch of people that come every summer to help him extract the clay. What's going to happen when he disappears? In fact, I was telling Charlie this the other day. I said, you know, I had stopped to think about it, and when I did stop to think about it, it was really scary. Do I start to stock up on clay now? What do I do? You know? Truth is I know how to extract the clay. I know how to clean it. I know how to do everything that I need to do. But am I going to be able to do like he does and have a contract with BLM? Because that's where it's at. That's where the clay is at. You know. So that's my first thought. My first fear. My second fear is that my children have followed in their father's footsteps, not mine. I have a daughter-in-law that is interested in clay, but I don't know that she and I can work together. I absolutely love her, but she is very much like I am, and we like to work where it's quiet, and we don't get that. You know, so when we're working together, it's just like, leave us alone. But when my son likes to kind of jump in and tell us what we're doing, and somebody else does too, we kind of like, leave us alone, you know. So, and then Jessica and I get upset with each other every once in a while, and we're just like, no, we need to do it this way. But I want to do this. I know better. You know, but anyways. And then I have my grandson who loves playing with clay. My granddaughter loves playing with clay, but they're very small right now. And I don't get them enough to be able to sit with them and actually have them watch me do pottery, do my pots. They like to get my Gianna is 4 years old, and she'll say, oh, Nana, that's pretty, and she'll stick her finger in my pot. You know, I can't do that. But, you know, eventually, you know, I would like for them to follow. I don't think it's going to happen. My son helps me a lot, not in the building of the pottery itself, but in the sanding process. Because his hands, he's 6'4". He's 260 pounds. He's got strength behind him. He's got big hands. So when he's helping me sand, I use sandstone. So he gets a big block of sandstone. He can just go right on that pot, and it just takes a lot of clay off. You know, and so he helps me in that way. But I don't know that anybody else is going to follow in my footsteps. I teach a lot of children, but I haven't had any one child or one person come to me and say, can you teach me exclusively? No, I haven't had that yet. So I don't know that anybody is going to do this particular tradition with me being the follower, with me being the leader. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that that's going to happen. In the Hispanic families, there's only, right now at Spanish Market, I believe there's only like 6 of us. Out of the 6 of us, there's only 1 of us that actually has children that are young enough, that are still at home, that can work pottery, and I don't know that they're doing that. So I don't know what's going to happen. It is a fear, you know. I don't want it to go dormant again like it did before. I don't want that at all. Now, I'm sure that the Pueblo children are doing potteries, and they're still using micaceous clay, and I don't think that's ever going to die. But as far as the Hispanic population, you know, I don't know. I honestly, truly do not know. And I think we need to work a little bit harder to get out there and find somebody that is interested in it.
Well, thank you. If you just a quick comment, and then we'll wrap things up. I joined Spanish Market in 1980. And there were 34 of us at Spanish Market in 1980. Spanish Market 2015 is closed to new artists. It's so full. There's over 300 artists at Spanish Market. Of those 300 artists, over 125 people are making santos. Of those 125 people making santos, 90 of them were my students. So, I have no fear that the Santero tradition is going to die out. My fear is, will the economy support it? There's plenty of Santeros now working, thank God. But like Andrew said, you know, is it gonna be commercially viable? Can somebody make a living? I have been fortunate that I closed my eyes, swallowed hard, and told my wife first and then my father, who was a non-believer, not the Santos. He just, you have to have an education. I said, I have a PhD, Dad. You have to have income always and everything else. He couldn't believe a person can make a living as an artist. And it's a struggle. We all, I can say all of us here have struggled. It's never easy because we're on that eternal roller coaster, you know. Some days the shop does well or our studio does well. Weeks will go by where we're thinking, God, will we pay the bills next month? But the fascinating thing is the traditions have survived. They've survived up to this point. Now, what the future has for us all, we don't know. I know the Santero tradition will survive at least as with the knowledge that people have. The weaving tradition, there's so many weavers now that are being supported by the business like Andrew has. Thank God for his business. Many families can put food on the table because of his business. Fred's shop, you know, he's able to support himself with the shop. Debbie and I, with the markets we go to. But that's not the case for many of the other artisans. I think the four of us here are very, very fortunate. And we're not only fortunate, but we've worked damn hard at it. I can tell you that's why we're fortunate. And what the future brings, and we don't want to leave you on a sad note. I think the pendulum will swing right back like it did back in the 80s. When we had so many buyers, we sold out at market. I'm hoping, we were just talking, just before we started the panel discussion, we were saying we're seeing a little bit of a slight increase in people coming, new families being introduced. Unfortunately, most of the families that I sold Santos to in the 80s and 90s have hung out their moccasins, so to speak. They're gone. Those collectors are gone. Their collections are now part of bigger collections because they willed them to museums and so on and so forth. What we got to do is we got to provide some kind of intrigue with new visitors to New Mexico and introduce a whole new class of collectors and people who become interested in tin work, in the weaving traditions, the pottery traditions, and the Santero traditions, and all the traditions that are represented at Spanish Market. The hard thing is getting that young generation to see value in handcrafts, in traditional arts. That's our biggest challenge, I think. It's not that we can't get other people to do it or it won't survive. It's getting those people who are going to pay for this stuff and realize that this is handmade and it takes time and it's consuming and it has a legacy to get those people to start buying it.
I think it's starting to happen.
It's starting to happen.
It really is starting to happen.
My own children have to start buying from other artisans.
Actually, our children have started buying
they have
from other
started,
artisans. And not only have they started to buy from other artisans, but they're introducing their friends to it, and their friends are introducing their friends. So we have seen an increase in kind of a new excitement about what it is that we're doing. And I'm saying young people, I mean 20s, late 20s, early 30s that are coming out, starting to ask questions. So basically what we're having to do, I don't know if this is true for you guys or not, but we have to do a lot of re-educating. We have to talk about our craft. We have to talk about how it's done, what we do, how we do it, why we do it. And people are starting to, you know, oh, really, really, yeah. And they start asking questions, and before you know it, in a sense, I hate to say this, but they're hooked.
You know, they're starting to appreciate something that they never knew anything about. Even our own children, you know, 11:15 at night, our children are calling us asking us dumb questions that they should know the answers to because they grew up with it, you know. But because they're trying to explain it to their friends at dinner. And we've had this happen, 11:15 at night, oh my God. But it's interesting, it is starting to happen, so it's a good thing, it's a very good thing.
Any final comments from either one of you, Andrew or Fred?
I think one of the ironic things about our business now is there's a huge interest from the Japanese that have, through this recession the last 5, 6, 7 years, they've actually kept us floating up, you know? And it's interesting, they come in, they like these vests, they like little blankets, and they like Indian jewelry. And they'll come in with a cowboy hat and a vest and jewelry, and it's an interesting thing. And it's just ironic because of being in Los Alamos and the relationship that Los Alamos had with Japan at one point, they still will come up here and buy stuff. So, you know, the world is good. It does circle around.
Not sure if there's anyone has questions or if we have time, but maybe somebody has some questions out there.
Yes.
First of all, let's give everyone a great round.
I was looking for a,
I was looking for a folk artist of religious art in Argentina, and I asked for a santero, and I could have just as well asked for something completely different. There was absolutely no understanding of that word at all. It's obviously purely New Mexican.
actually, it's not even New Mexican. So, just real quick,
It's not even, never used in the colonial period, never used by any of my ancestors. It's a word made up by the Taos artist colony trying to describe to their friends back at the East Coast using what they, little knowledge they knew of Spanish. Somebody who makes shoes, zapatos, is a zapatero. Somebody who cuts wood is leña, is a leñero. So somebody who makes santos has to be a santero. And the word got made up. It got made up and we adopted it. The Hispanic community adopted it. The santos, the santeros were known in the colonial period as either an escultor, a sculptor, or a pintor. And they often used in New Mexico the word maestro, the master, that implied that he had skills. But you're absolutely right. In South America, in Mexico, and any place else, sometimes the word carpintero, carpenter, was used, but you're absolutely right. They never used. It's not. It's a made-up word.
I'm just wondering, Charlie, if you know, the Spanish traditions are so deep and so rich and so varied, much more so than in a lot of other cultures. So I'm wondering if, for instance, the difficulties that you all described about possibly having the end to it, these traditions, is that the case in, say, the colcha, embroidery, and perhaps in other forms too? I'm thinking of like
it's
straw
it's
inlay.
across the board.
Okay, and then I have one other question. What would you two think about buying materials from outside of the U.S.? You know, the wool and the tin. Would you ever do that?
Not if we could help it.
Is it
There's a
coming
few-
to that?
Well, you know, I often wonder where the wool comes. The woolen mills. There's woolen mills. The Ohio one. There's one in Nebraska. We get our warp from Wisconsin, near Green Bay. So I think there'd probably be some American mills that we would buy from. I think the pricing would be keep it too out of line, so we wouldn't have to bring it from somewhere else. where they get the wool from is a question. You know, we don't know if the wool that's grown in the United States, it might be imported from Australia or New Zealand or something, and then processed here. We don't know that for sure.
I was just wondering if all the mills were shutting down.
They haven't yet. Well, people still like wool, so, you know, they like wool garments. They're not just making their wool for us, for hand weavers, they're making it for other people, so hopefully.
Yeah, as far as the tin goes, that's a thought to get it from out of the country, but the texture matters, the thickness of it, and can you solder it? Can you cut it? Is it gonna be hard to cut? All those questions are involved, so that's what we need to think about.
Just make a comment about just a quick
Quick comment about even my own tradition. Traditionally, Santos, the bultos were carved out of cottonwood roots, much like the Kachina figures were carved, historically always carved out of cottonwood. About 95% of all the Santos and collections in all the museums throughout the country that have New Mexican pieces, the carved figures are carved out of cottonwood roots. Very few of them are carved out of any other wood, a couple of them out of ponderosa pine, but they're rare. Cottonwood root isn't possible to get anymore. Why? Because we built dams on all the rivers. Spring flooding would cause the rivers to flood. Cottonwood trees that grew along rivers would get turned over, and those trees the roots would be harvested, because the roots are very, very deep. Those roots would be harvested by the Santeros, the Kachina makers, and so on. And it doesn't happen anymore. When they built the Alameda Bridge in Albuquerque 16 or 17 years ago, every Hopi carver, Kachina carver on this side of the Mississippi, and every Navajo carver making fake Kachinas, and one Charlie Carrillo gathering for all the Santeros was out there, and we were all fighting over cottonwood root, because it's impossible to get anymore. Because literally the economics of how you get it and where you get it have completely changed. You know, we've dammed all the rivers in New Mexico, so cottonwood root isn't available anymore. So guess what I use? That people would be shocked when I tell you that. If I can get cottonwood root, I use it. For most of the Santeros are using a wood. It's a renewable wood. It grows fast. It's a wood called jayutang, comes out of Indonesia. I import every 4 or 5 years about $20,000 worth of jayutang. Who supplies jayutang to the rest of all the Santeros in New Mexico? Charlie Carrillo. Okay. Yeah, I buy it by getting orders from them, collecting their money, and putting in between a $15,000 and $20,000 order for a jayutang, and it lands up in my driveway, and we have 25 or 30 or 40 Santeros visiting the house for about a month, and we're chopping it up into pieces, but I do that because if I couldn't do that, it would be very costly for me to import it by myself. So I take advantage of all the rest of the guys and gals who are making Santos, and we form like a small cooperative, and I don't make any money off of it, but I do it because I need it. And that's the only way. So the economics of these things change things drastically.
If you could find a way to use up Chinese elm, I would appreciate it.
That's exactly what.
I'm gonna interject a question myself. Fred, can you tell us about the New Mexico State, was it logo or emblem that you did? What year was that, and how did that come about?
Okay, the Department of Tourism came into my store and they were looking for some to promote New Mexico, and I kind of sketched something for them, and they had some letters, the words New Mexico that they wanted to put, Land of Enchantment, in there, and this was back in late 90s, and so I designed it, they liked it, I hammered it out, they took photos of it, and the rest is history. I mean, it's been seen by millions, and you've probably seen it on lots of the brochures and things like that. It's on my business card in the gallery over here. So I think it did real well. Now they have another one, but that one's still out there also. So I'm glad that they were able to do that, promote New Mexico with teamwork.
I was just interested in your comment about the disappearance for a while of the Micacious pottery. When was that, and what was going on then that it disappeared?
After World War II, it started disappearing, correct?
Well,
Basically,
He's the expert, he wrote the book.
I wrote my dissertation. Basically, what happened was commercial cookpots were available, and the price of handmade pots was more expensive at World War II than a cheap aluminum pot. Even because most of what happened was at World War II, all the metal was going to the war effort. So aluminum came into Hispanic families, and you could order a pot, and it would cost you X number of dollars or trade, and you could go down to Bodie's in Abiquiu and pick up an aluminum pot for 15 cents. And so, and that was expensive. But the enamel and the aluminum really replaced the necessity of people having to do handmade cookware. So people, during World War II, a lot of Hispanic families had aluminum bean pots, or things that had been handed down generation when the Santa Fe Trail opened up, cast iron pots and Dutch ovens and stuff like that came over the Santa Fe Trail, really wiped out the necessity of people having to make something out of clay. And the trouble with these is, as tough and as durable as they are, they break. And you drop a cast iron skillet, unless you drop it on a concrete thing from high up, cast iron skillet's not gonna, or cast iron bean pot's not gonna bust. So it was, again, it's economics, it's purely economics.
One last question, anyone? Okay, I invite you to come up and speak to the panelists again. This is wonderful. I gotta admit, when I got their biographies and when I was researching them so that I could introduce them, thank you, John, for doing that. I gained such an appreciation for each of you and for your craft, and it's just fabulous. So we're very honored to have you here. Let's give them all a big round of applause.